It gives you something to read, and it's the same thing, like backwards. Like, oh. And then we're at the seminar, and here's the weirdest thing. So you have to know English people, but like, if anybody needs an interpreter, oh, kidding me? Honest to God, they are.
I'm going to speak Hungarian.
I guess we should start with introductions all around in case there are people who don't know each other. I'm Julie Sim. I'm from the MIT CCAT program. I'm currently the chair of the Science and Technology Advisory Committee.
I'm Dan Cotigan. I'm here from MWRA and the helper vice chair of the committee.
Barbara Warren, Sales and Coast Watch, and Lower North Shore Regional Coordinator.
Todd Callahan, MassBays Goal.
Sarah Grady, South Shore, MassBays, North and South Rivers Watershed. Joanne Marmoto, Association to Preserve and Cape Cod Regional Coordinator.
Robert Buxbaum with Minnesota on the board of Sales and Coast Watch.
And Margarita Pryor, EPA Region 1. And I'm Emily Shamshiniya, contractor with EPA Region 1 and PA Biocriteria Program. And I'm Conceptual. Yeah.
Is anyone on the phone?
Oh, Catherine Ford is supposed to be calling in.
Yeah. Is anybody on the phone?
Hi, this is Catherine Ford at Division Marine Fisheries. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Hi. I didn't hear you.
Great.
So it's great that you could make it.
Yeah, I'm on the go-to meeting, so I can see the slides.
Okay, that's good. So I'll ask you about that.
Okay, I'd like to introduce Emily Shamshiniya, although she's introduced herself a little bit already. Emily is going to be talking about biological condition gradient, which she has been working with EPA for the last 6 or 7 years. As an independent contractor, Emily got her PhD at URI in oceanography in 2007 and has been focusing on this kind of work since then. So she's going to give us a presentation. We can have some discussion on whether or not this kind of framework is useful for thinking about the estuaries in the MassBays system. And I don't know, Margarita, if you want to say something about the work that you guys have been doing at EPA?
A little bit, which is that this biological condition gradient is something that sort of arose way back in like 1990, something like that, when we started to have to do metrics about what our programs accomplished. And so one of the original metrics was, and I'm like flabbergasted at the audacity of it, which was to say 85% of watersheds will be, have aquatic, integrity. And it was like, whoa! and the question was, how will you even know that? And so that's where this comes in, because it gives you some very quantifiable ways of defining that integrity across a whole variety of different kinds of systems. The interesting thing, and so they did a lot of the original work for this on streams in Ohio and Maine, and we were very excited when I worked with the estuary program down in DC. We were very excited because we have 28 very different systems across the country, and this was a way of being able to assess in a similar way, not, let me tell you, Emily will describe it much better than me, but what it did was it gave us a way to compare, not by similarity of the system, but by similarity of your condition, so that you describe the condition similarly. And that was very exciting to us, because it's very difficult to do that in the stream system. And the other good thing about it is that it enables you, at whatever level of sophistication or resources or capacity your monitoring program is, you can step into it at whatever level and go into it with more data as they become available. So that's a really good setup, actually.
Just to warn people, we are recording this so that other members of the management committee can watch and listen to it later. So watch your language. I'm sure nobody will care about it. And Emily, just to make sure that your
going to stand up, even though this room's small and it feels like I'm like jumping onto you guys, but I'm more comfortable standing when I talk. So, as Margarita mentioned, this is a long-standing project or effort, and it involves a lot of folks in this region and elsewhere. Margarita from Region 1, and we have a small working group that we've been sharing ideas with based in Narragansett at the Atlantic Ecology Lab, PA AED in Narragansett. And so some of the logical first applications of this estuarine version of the biological condition gradient have been in our southeast New England estuaries. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but we're excited to be invited to talk to you about this today. So this is a really basic overview talk about what BCG is. It doesn't really go into the history so much as what the estuarine BCG is today and how we've developed it to date. The main points from the talk are that the estuarine BCG is not really a new thing. So then why would you want to use it? Who's using it and how might MassBays use it? And I put together some ideas for you guys based on a couple other meetings that you all invited me to, and so I hope you don't get mad at me for presuming anything at the end. So the BCG is really a new thing. I think it's something that you're all really familiar with intuitively and probably have thought about already doing for the program. This just really is putting a formal framework around already accepted ideas and putting some standards on things. So the bullet points I have here are that the BCG really takes one or more biological attributes and they're used to assess biological or ecological conditions. There are up to 6 levels of biological response to increasing stress. The best level is undisturbed and the worst, in quotes, is severely degraded. There are thresholds and decision rules that you could define either narratively with best professional judgment, or you could actually use quantitative models. But the process is based on scientific data, it's transparent, testable, and defensible as an assessment method. And so this is one of the, like, if you take nothing else from this discussion, it would be this. And then the second one would be, why would you want to use it? Because, as Margarita mentioned, it provides this consistent and common language for these assessment terms, for the attributes and for the levels, that can allow comparisons among other assessments in different environments. It really promotes a systems level examination to be used to assess past and present condition and help you set targets in a really transparent way for future status and to track progress towards that. And it's an easily understood and powerful communication tool, or lends itself really well to be a powerful communication tool. So now I'm just going to dig a little bit deeper into the details of what we mean by assessment and looking at that stressor response gradient. As Margarita mentioned, this concept of biological integrity is really the core of Clean Water Act and what we mean by that in terms of assessing estuaries against it when we know something has integrity. The definition that our group has been using is that it's the capability of an aquatic system to support and maintain a balanced, integrated, adaptive community of organisms having a composition and diversity comparable to that of the natural habitat of the region. We look at this definition in a little bit more detail. We can pull out some things that help us apply this to an assessment. There are quantitative measures, for example, of composition and diversity in terms of communities out there. We have the term natural that we can use as a reference or adapt to our use as a reference. And when we think about the habitats of the region and what belongs here or what our biogeography is like, we think about classification. So this is a little clue to later. We're going to talk about the steps to completing a BCG, and all of these things are involved. So that way, this thing, can we get that out of the way maybe? Oh, well, whatever. Okay. So with increased disturbance, just in an ecological sense, we can make some generalizations about the changes that we expect to see in an ecosystem. So we know that sensitive organisms are sensitive to pollution or disturbance, and they will decrease in abundance with widespread disturbance. That we see tolerant organisms become more abundant. We see a decrease in diversity and an increase in dominance of one or a few types of organisms, usually opportunistic organisms. I messed up by touching that. It's okay. Okay, so when we put this in a conceptual diagram, all of those concepts, we have a biological indicator on the y-axis and our stressor gradient on the x-axis, and stress is increasing to the right. And you see things like native taxa really declining, and you see highly intolerant taxa increasing, intolerant taxa decreasing, things like, this is an example from the streams, but things like fish tumors and lesions increasing with increasing stress, and you see that like intermediate abundance bump with the stressor gradient too. So we have these like general conceptually predictable things that we know should occur. And we can apply these, a number of these attributes here that relate to each one of those lines in the graph in some way. So, for example, the fish lesions or whatever would be a condition indicator. And in estuaries, we use things like harmful algal blooms, outbreaks of other harmful taxa, measures of habitat health, such as seagrass condition. Fish pathology is included. We have structural attributes, which are like your macrovertebrate community indices, functional attributes, like trophic linkages and food webs, connectivity indices, which, you know, might be like your diagenous fish passages and things like that, and then a non-native taxa attribute. The thing with the BCG is that you don't have to use all of these. You could concentrate just on one. And in fact, one of our pilot projects in Narragansett Bay, a small abatement of Narragansett Bay, we just used structural attributes, and we really just looked at habitat condition over time. And that was what we built our BCG on. So these are just ways to bin some of the indicators that you might already be thinking about and make them relatable to other BCGs. So this plot shows how you would graph each of these attributes, and when you apply the condition level, how they might show up on your stressor response plot. And the number 1 on the y-axis relates to a natural or undisturbed condition, and the 6 would be your extremely degraded system. And you see the stressor gradient there on the x-axis, essentially mirroring that. So the different lines here sort of represent different possible responses of your ecosystem. So you might have some that are really resilient, and it takes a lot of stress to sort of push that biological condition down, and you have some that are really sensitive, where it doesn't take much stress at all before biological condition or ecological condition tends to plummet. And these are just conceptualizations, so every ecosystem might be different, and that might be telling in itself. When you plot these levels of condition against stress, you learn something about how resilient or sensitive your ecosystem is. There's a publication that is just about to come out through EPA about the estuary implementation of the biological condition. So it's the first publication that's really specific to estuaries. I wish I had copies to share with you today, but EPA has messed up the printing. But I'll find a way to share the PDF version with you all as soon as it's available. Perfect. Yeah. It's a great document, and I've pulled out some of the action steps that document lays out here, and there are 11 of them, but they're binned into these different stages. So in the first stage of like a program might be considering a BCG, we call these first ones the management steps, where you clarify the needs of your program and where you want to take the work. And it, looks at things like identifying who you're trying to do this for. What are the management goals and objectives of the program, and what are the things that you need to measure, and what are the things that are important to your program? So those are this one group of steps. Once you have that figured out, you can move on to thinking about how you might apply BCG for a sort of non-regulatory or management type application, which is really about like setting targets, communicating results, and motivating folks like in the public to be interested and care about what you're doing. So these steps are delineate and classify the water body, organize your existing data, and collect new data if you need it. Define either a minimally disturbed reference condition, an undisturbed, or whatever reference point is practical for your data and for the program. And then develop these narrative descriptions, at least, of the expected biology for each of those levels after minimally disturbed. And this is where, again, there's a lot of flexibility in each of these steps where we've had examples where programs don't have the 6 levels of conditions. They just have 3. They couldn't, resolve 6, so they collapsed it to 3. Or they didn't like the idea of minimally disturbed because we're never going to get back to minimally disturbed, so let's never talk about that. Let's define something else. And they come up with some really practical adaptations. And finally, the last couple steps here, these really relate to like, once you have a very well-established set of stressor-response relationships and you think it's strong enough, you could actually implement this in a regulatory way, you could convert those narrative descriptions to something more quantitative. And this would be like if you actually built quantitative out of your conceptual models, really flesh out that stressor-response relationship so that you can, key in on some important thresholds, organize and report results, and develop decision support, communication, monitoring tools, assist management partners, etc. So these are really like the final stages of building this out and communicating the results. So I just wanted to provide really brief overview of some of the folks that we know are using this fairly successfully, and these are not going to be deep dives into each of these programs at all, and I encourage you to seek out more information about them that can help you guys get more information about all of these things to learn more. This is not estuaries really, although I think Guanaco Bay is technically an estuary. I mean, Puerto Rico and Guanaco Bay, they're looking at using the PCG for the coral reef ecosystem they have there. And they've done this really neat expert-driven process where they bring experts in to use best professional judgment and actually look at underwater video transects of coral reefs and say, is this reef, high quality, medium quality, or whatever? And so their attributes are physical structure, corals, fungus, gorgonians. They have a condition attribute, fish, vertebrates, other invertebrates, algae, and plants. So, for example, in this condition level 1 to 2, they relate it to BCG level 1 to 2, which they say is excellent. They know that they have high rugosity and 3D structure to their reef. They have a lot of large fish around. They have this type of coral, and blah, 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 blah. So, they've really built these attributes and condition level descriptions for coral reefs and are building this really robust application. At Tampa Bay, I think that we've mentioned this program here before, maybe. They have really taken it from beginning to end, and I'll show you the steps in a minute that they sort of checked off, but they implemented this program several years ago to restore the historic balance of habitat in Tampa Bay. And so they looked at things like seagrass, mangroves, different types of marshes, and they had data going back to 1950 that showed the different area or footprint of these habitats and their ratios. And they set a goal to restore the balance of those habitats that existed roughly around 1950. And they even recognized that prior to 1950, they have 1900 here, question mark, that they don't really know. They don't have quantitative data about what those mix of habitats was, but they suspect it was, higher than 1950. So they have, laid out their assumptions, set some goals, showed the biological condition relative to 1900 here on the graph on the right, and then they implemented this sort of like public outreach program and even regulatory program to reduce nitrogen in the watershed and make a number of other improvements. And they've seen their seagrass recover and exceed the goal that they had set. So this is actually just from that presentation I was telling you about last week that folks gave reporting the success of this program. And so when you look at the 11 steps, Tampa Bay has basically gone through and done them all. I mean, they've carried it all the way through and they've seen that like management and regulatory result of using this concept. Another example I want to talk about was, as I mentioned, we're working with the Narragansett Bay estuary program to implement BCG and BCG-like assessment. And we did a pilot project with them several years, or in the geographic area several years ago, just in a small portion of Narragansett Bay called Greenwich Bay. And what we did was, similar to Tampa Bay, we took this historical perspective where we wanted to look at what habitats existed and what cultural and socioeconomic events coincided with the different ecological changes in that bay. This being an example of the types of stressors we looked at, so the population in the watershed, the resulting water quality, the sediment quality, and natural climatic events, and try to relate this to a number of habitat components in the bay. We looked at seagrass, benthic communities, and we lumped together primary productivity and shellfish, and we basically assembled all of the data that we could find on these three ecosystem components and came up with some binning to assign condition levels over time from pre-colonial through the present day. And this is what the figure sort of looks like. So we didn't even really have a quantitative stressor gradient. We had a generalized stressor gradient that we knew integrated all of those things on the previous plot that I showed. But we were able to say, there are this many acres of seagrass in 2006, and we think that that is, whatever proportion of what did exist in pre-colonial times as a condition level 1. And so you can see that for some of these attributes, in the industrial period, seagrass spans many condition levels, and that could be either spatially or temporally in that window. It ranged from condition level 4 to condition level 6. And we do see in Narragansett Bay, in general, a north-south gradient where sometimes in the open part of the bay, the mouth of the bay, there's far more seagrass and things like that. And so it would be appropriate to say the condition spans several levels, even in one single point in time. So this is a little sneak peek of what the estuary program is working on right now and how they're organizing their indicators for their new report. They've got a number of stressor indicators on the left, and they are in bins related to climate change, landscape factors, and chemical stressors. And they have a series of condition indicators on the right that are bins by whether they're in the bay, the watershed, or if they relate to public health. And they're trying to relate in this diagram that the stressors cause stress to the condition indicators, but both of these things, both the stressors and the condition, affect the benefits that people receive from the watershed in the bay and the societal uses of the indicator information and how they apply to the ecosystem as well. So this is, there's a lot in this diagram, there's a lot of words, but they're trying to make these linkages clear in their report. Here's how this plays out on a, single indicator example. So for seagrasses, they collapse the number of stressors that are dominant for that, affecting that indicator. So, there's all of this explanation that, we know that there are more stressors, but here are the dominant ones, temperature, sea level, and nutrient loading. and then they note where a condition indicator actually can influence another condition indicator. So for example, water clarity will affect seagrass, and then seagrass can then affect another condition indicator itself. In this case, it's estuary and fish communities. So each chapter of the report, the technical report, will lead with a figure like this that just sort of lays out conceptually these stressor-response relationships. Yes?
To ask in general, for like seagrasses for Narragansett Bay, is the idea averaged across all Narragansett Bay, or do they break it up into smaller parts and say, seagrass in this spot is a 3 and this spot is a 6?
Right, right. I think that in the report, in the technical report, it does get into regionalization of the bay. I'm not sure what they're leading. I think they're reporting everything in the public-facing report as whole bay, whole estuary metrics. So they'll summarize and say, for the entire bay, we have this many acres compared to historical. We think it's, you know.
So it's just number of acres, it's not the health of those acres.
Right. Yep. And I should also mention that for these relationships as they're displayed here, I don't think there's any examples of where it's actually quantified. So they're just laying out conceptually, we know this affects this, and that could lead to X, Y, Z. There's no actual, you know, modeling happening or quantitative linkages being made, no thresholds being identified in terms of, you know, at this temperature is where we start to see seagrasses decline, or at this level of nutrient loading is where we start to see seagrasses decline. They haven't gotten that far yet. It was just laying out some basic concepts. I think that's their intention, yeah. But recognizing that sometimes that could be a lot, many more steps after this.
Because that's sort of been worked out for water class. Seagrass, really.
Sure, yeah. Yes, there's certainly examples in the literature for, even in nutrients, a lot of Scott Nixon's work in the mesocosms in Narragansett Bay, he sorted out some of those, or he and students had sorted out some of those thresholds. But in the bay itself, they don't have, they have a water quality metric. They haven't actually taken that data and, you know, made the linkage with the existing seagrass data in the bay to say, in the real world, in our actual, you know, live bay, this is what we've observed. They haven't made those linkages yet. So when we look at the steps that Narragansett Bay has gone through, you know, they did a pretty good job at the top chunk of taking off these first several steps, organizing their existing data and collecting new data if needed. They have not given as much attention yet to this, you know, idea of defining reference points or doing narrative descriptions of what the condition levels would be. And like we just said, they haven't converted those into anything quantitative yet. But they have, in some ways, developed a little bit of a stressor gradient and identified some important stressor-response relationships. And they're working on right now organizing, interpreting, and reporting those results. So this is just to demonstrate that even though we have these 11 steps, you know, numbers 1 through 11, the process doesn't necessarily have to be linear. You can go back and work on quantifying, or you could iterate and, you know, move through these middle steps as often as you need to in order to get a product that you're happy with. I'll stop there before I get into this piece to see if there are any other questions or thoughts.
Emily, this is Catherine. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Hi, Catherine.
Hi. I guess I was wondering, have there been any instances where, say, a positive biological attribute like the number of waterfowl ends up being a stressor for another biological attribute like seagrass?
That's a good question. I can't think of one off the top of my head now, but I'm sure, like, theoretically that's possible.
I would say that one of the approaches, you know, that we've been trying to take with AED is this idea, which Tampa really piloted, of a habitat mosaic, because it enables you to look at the system. You're going to say, because everybody wants to know, how is the bay doing? And you can say, well, the fish are doing this, the waterfowl are doing this, the seagrasses, but it's not telling you what the system is like. And so if you look at the collection of habitats that ought to be there and you find some way of defining among yourselves what serves as the right balance of those habitats, then you can say something about all of those different little pieces as sort of an organizing framework, and you can say something about that as a whole. So it's not quite answering Catherine's question, but that's what they've been trying to do, particularly in Tampa.
While you were talking, I had some time to think about that. So in Narragansett Bay, they have, one of the metrics I showed is estuary and fish communities, and that's obviously a pretty broad topic. And within that indicator, there have been changes over the past 50 years or so where demersal fish have become less abundant and less viable just from a reproductive standpoint because of these warming waters, which has allowed lobsters, or at one time allowed lobsters and crabs and everything to, take advantage of that predation release, and they've exploded in number. But then you have other summer migrants coming in that are staying longer because water temperatures are warmer, and they're eating the, now overabundant lobsters and decapods. So to humans that, in particular lobster fishermen who experienced a boom in lobster abundance maybe a couple decades ago, that are now experiencing a huge crash in lobster abundance, that is not a positive indicator for them, but it's still a functioning fish community in some ways. And so trying to sort out what's positive and what's negative into who is why they really felt the need to pull in the social piece, the benefits people receive from the bay and watershed, and some of the uses of this information. They acknowledge that. They've put this up front in this diagram, and they've talked about it a little bit, but there's really they haven't started quantifying things like ecosystem services, and they haven't gotten, they're not really advanced in terms of how would explain that scenario that I just did and relate that to something like quality. Does that sort of help answer that question or address it a little bit?
Yeah, that helps, and also that concept of sort of moving up a level of thinking and being able to create a more quantitative description of a balanced ecosystem. That definitely helps me.
Cool. So do they break it up into small chunks? So do they have different, the way we have done, or GeoSynthetic has done for MassBays, is Narragansett Bay delineated into a lot of different sub-estuaries that are then, averaged or something like that, or total in terms of acreage, or are they really just, how does it work?
Yeah. They have actually a number of different spatial units, and they are able to report some indicators at the finest scales and also aggregate them up, but others there's just no data available for all of those different units. I wouldn't even call them, they're not daemons, they're just units. So they're running into an issue where something like water clarity is measured at a couple stations, Upper Bay and, mid to lower Bay over time, and does it really make sense to report water clarity for the unit that station is in that one, or should they average between the two and say this is average bay water quality, right? And then you have other indicators that there are numerous sampling points all over the bay in all of the different units, and they were taken at multiple time periods, so they have a more robust understanding. And seagrass is a good example of that, where they can say, in this unit, seagrass acreage did this. You have a little graph that shows, how it declined or changed. So it depends. Their boundaries are not defined the same way, I think, as you got. Well, maybe they are. So they're physical, but there are some arbitrary, like, navigational channel delineations and things like that. So they're not 100% based on like a watershed approach or a biogeographical approach. spatial geographical approach.
I would agree.
One interesting thing about my understanding of Narragansett Bay, which is maybe similar to what Catherine is asking about, one value conflicting with another, was Scott Nixon talking about oligotropification of, you know, the nutrients, the fact that they're cleaning up the bay has led to a decline in certainly some of the productivity. I think to the point where he was suggesting maybe we're cleaning it up too much for maximum productivity.
Yeah.
That's
I
kind of
would
a
say the
difficult thing.
Narragansett Bay Commission really like that idea.
But
that's, I mean, and that's another challenge of like the spatial coverage. So there's only a few sites in the bay where they have long-term phytoplankton data. And so one question is, if you're measuring productivity or chloride at one site, how representative is that for the entire bay? And the second issue there is some of the other indicators don't jive, like the results don't mesh with what you would expect. If we have decreasing primary productivity, wouldn't we see, fewer hypoxic events, or, better water quality in general and healthier benthic communities maybe? So there are labs and things like that. And I see Dan like shifting in his seat. Has something to say about this.
Just thinking, you're saying interesting things.
Yeah.
I care about them. It's always dangerous, Dan.
What, shifting my seat?
No, thank you.
But yeah, so it's complicated, right? And so to try to convey that through a status and trends report to people who are like, I don't even know why I should care about chlorophyll, is challenging. That's the thing that they're wrestling with. Interestingly, chlorophyll concentrations did decline a little bit a decade ago, but I think in the most recent decade, they have not. There's really no trend. So the question still remains, is the water quality management, the stormwater management, and all the upgrades to the sewage treatment plants, when are we going to see like a definite signal in Narragansett Bay that that's had an effect? And so far, the initial indicators are things like shellfishing beds are being changed from closed to conditional or open, and there are fewer beach closures and things. So like the immediate indicators, like bacteria, are starting to reflect potentially those management upgrades, but longer-term integrators like benthic communities, there's initially good signs, but not 100% better. And seagrass as well, same thing. Anyway, I don't want to go into like a whole treatise on Narragansett Bay.
Can I bring one more subject up? It seems like it might be useful to use trends instead of numbers when you have a lot of different, especially something like Narragansett Bay where you've got upper bay and lower bay that are going to be really different. But you could say, this metric is improving here, decreasing here, and that's something that might be applicable to our systems as well, because instead of saying, well, this embayment has X phytoplankton or X water clarity, and that one has something else, you could say this one is improving, this one has been decreasing, and maybe work in the time frame over how long the trend has been. I don't know, it's just an unformed idea that popped in.
I think the thing that has happened in the past, anyway, they had something that they called watershed counts, which had exactly that. They said, well, this is improving, but what was missing was the relative to what. And that's why I think EPA at headquarters that has been supporting this is so excited about what you guys are doing about setting targets, because now you've got something that up or down arrow is related to. Because otherwise you're just saying, well, it's improving, but yeah, so that's really important.
Okay, so I just had a couple ideas for you guys based on what I've read and heard from you all. So I just, this is really obvious. When you look at the 11 steps, delineate and classify the water body and the watershed of interest. And of course, 3 steps before that, I think you guys have already done. But delineate and classify, that's what the EDA is meant to do. So, boom, perfect. You're already on step 5. And thinking about some of the work that Northeastern has done, and pulling out some of these preliminary thresholds that they're identifying that might be influencing certain indicators, and what the relevant stressors are that are influencing those indicators. I'm not saying that this is extremely robust and could be immediately applied, but it's getting on the road to identifying some of these relationships and organizing that information. And this is the one that I think personally most exciting about what you guys could potentially do is for the different clusters of the embayments that Northeastern has identified or will identify, and these in theory are based on this mix of stressors and the condition of the indicators in each of these embayments. You're sort of identifying these places that are similar on those terms. You might find that each one has a different, but each separate cluster has a different trajectory on this diagram, so all of the embayments within can be generalized, and that would apply. So like for an embayment or a cluster that is, really rocky shoreline and well flushed, and I don't know, something like that, you might find that it's this like little dotted line. And so that whole cluster sort of responds to stressors in that way. But then for one that has like a really urban watershed and lots more pollution or something, you might find that it's a different set of response curves for those embayments that belong to that cluster. And so that's something that within a program, we haven't really seen this potential for diversity and actually partitioning different sections of the study area and saying, these actually we're using BCG for all of them, but we're actually using like little different BCGs for each one because they're not expected to respond the same way to stressors, and they might not even have the same stressors. So anyway, that immediately jumped out to me when I saw this clustering that you guys were doing. Yeah.
Maybe it's something that I missed. Where did that map come from? Remember the draft that
the first
Northeastern came.
Yeah.
They're working on redoing.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I just grabbed this. It's not something that you guys gave to me.
That was from the meetings probably, and that's being refined. Right. Just an example here.
But the idea is that they're clustered. We're not going to compare Salem Sound and Boston to the Cape.
Right.
Yeah. That's what we're avoiding.
Yes.
Yeah, from like using the
one.
Yeah. Right. That kind of thing. But the concept is clear. No, I was afraid I missed something.
Okay.
Some documents I never read or something.
In between.
So really, I mean, I didn't have many more complex ideas for you all than that. It's just, start off discussion. But I did want to mention these resources that I cited throughout and talked about indirectly in some of the slides, and happy to share these after so that folks can learn more. The first reference, the practitioner's guide, has an entire appendix of applications to estuaries and larger water bodies. So most of the documents dedicated to the application streams, and the appendix has a lot of great case studies. The coral case studies in there. We have a Narragansett Bay case study in there. And then the Chichetti et al. The implementing the BCG for estuaries and coasts. That's where the 11 steps are, and that's really useful document too.
the first one is one I sent in the email, and that's online at the YouTube.
Yeah. And that's it.
In the three examples you gave, Puerto Rico had 3 classes. Can't remember what Tampa had. I think they had 6, and Narragansett Bay had 6. Those classes, were there further numeric refinements that put areas into those classes, or was it best professional judgment? And when it was best professional judgment, how did they do that? Was it a group like this? Was it sort of the weight of evidence? Was it the average of a group's interpretation? Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. And some of the coral reef material goes into that process. So it was, they had a number of workshops where they had experts come together, and they literally had like computers set up with different video, and they said, you know, go around and look at the video and tell us how you would rate the condition of the reef that you see and why, like, what are the reasons. And it was really interesting to me about that process was the experts were like, are you going to tell us anything about like where these reefs are? And they were like, no, we want to be blind. Like, we want you to just look at the video and just tell us what you think. And the experts said, well, where the reef is really matters to like how we would interpret what we see. So if it's like a windward reef, or you know, where it is positioned, what direction it's facing, and the depth and all that stuff. So that's where like the habitat context really matters in terms of condition. And it's another reason why the approach that you guys are taking, like with clustering, like with like, seems to be like a really good approach. But anyway, the way that they developed that and turned it into the narrative condition levels and attributes, I'm not entirely sure. I sat in on a couple conference calls where they were doing that and saying like, okay, we generally all agree that these large groupers, it applies to condition 1. I'd have to read a little bit more into the documentation to figure out, exactly what that process is like. But I think it's a good model.
Way back at the beginning when they were doing this for streams, that was the process that they used. They convened state biologists, people who had anything to do with trying to assess or classify the condition of these resources. And they provided sort of like a case study question. Here's this area, and it has this, 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 and this. And they broke people up into groups and said, how would you rate these? So it was exactly the same sort of thing. And they brought that best professional judgment into it. And then what they did was they tried to take out of that process some of the concepts that you would pull out of that. What are the organizing rules that they all ended up using to arrive at their conclusions? And that's what's embedded. So you've got, in the classic BCG, you have these 6 tiers from naturally to severely degraded, and then you have these, what they call attributes, that describe a series of specific elements that you would look at for each one of those tiers. And when we tried to do it for estuaries, a lot of those attributes didn't really apply in an estuarine system. When you look, for example, at tolerant species, well, estuaries, they have to be tolerant. That's what should be there, is a very tolerant dynamic system. So we tried to collapse it into different ways and try to capture things that were not, in fact, relevant when you were looking at streams. And what we found was when we looked at estuaries, one of the attributes is connectivity. And that was something that streams, they didn't really care about, because you really looked at segments in streams. But when you look at estuaries, you've got this entire ocean dynamic coming in, you've got the landside stuff coming in, and that whole issue about how do you place this particular assessment resource in that overall continuum, it really came to the top. And it is a very intellectual exercise that we're dealing with right now, but it also makes it very interesting for people to work on.
So I had a kind of a follow-up question, building on what Margarita just said. You said that of the 5 or 6 estuary BCG attributes that we could try tracking over time, we didn't need to use all 5 or 6 of them. You could choose 1. So what rises to the top? What's the most important ones that we should try to? Because I can't see tracking all 5 or 6 of these right off the bat. How would you prioritize choosing these?
Well,
or do you have to prioritize?
Yeah, you don't have to.
Okay.
So I would just say it's based on what data you have. And this classification, for lack of a better term, is really just lays the indicators that you're measuring within the framework so that if someone picks up a BCG from MassBays, it's like, oh, what are the condition indicators that they're measuring? Let me see what condition indicators are measured in Narragansett Bay. Let me see which ones are measured in the coral reef. It's really, you know, this has no bearing really on the result at all. It's just a formality. But you do sort of get an idea for the breadth of different kinds of indicators that are useful that you can apply framework. And if you have some that, you know, fit into each of these bins, then that's great. But like I said, with the Grand Bay example, that we only had the structure, habitat type metrics that we used. And there were 3 or 4 different ones in that category. That's all we had. We called it a, what do we call it? A structural habitat BCG or something.
Yeah, something. I forget.
There's a paper about that in the chair.
A few years ago now, the Gulf of Maine Council and NROC and New York Group all pulled together scientists for the integrated sentinel monitoring.
Yeah.
And they tried to pick out indicators that they think would be the first ones to reflect change, ecosystem change. And so is that something that's tie into here that we can say they've identified those indicators as the ones? I mean, they had all the experts in the room from our region and said which ones are going to be the first to show them the change when it happens. It seems that those could be folded in here as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could take any biological or environmental indicator and use this approach. And in fact, most people already do. They just call it BCG, you know.
You could try to do that, but one of the challenges is a lot of those things aren't measured. In that way, a lot of those folks who were at those meetings were shelf researchers, so there'll be like things that are measured on larger scales with satellites that might not be appropriate for these days. But we should look at that and see if there are some that we could pull out.
Yeah.
The other thing I was thinking was that the analysis that Northeastern is doing is part of the clustering process. You can run a program routine called Simper that tells you which of the elements that you put in to cluster are most responsible for the clusters. And you make some a priori cutoff, and you can choose, or you can just say top 5, top 10, whatever. And so you can grab those, and then maybe start to do some of this other work where you get a group of people and say, okay, within this cluster of these 10 things, how do you break those into 3 groups or 6 groups? And then you assign it to each of the embayments and say where they are in that scale.
Yeah, right.
It also giving you a spatial representation as well.
You don't want to choose the elements that aren't really that important.
Right.
You can't choose elements that don't have data.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. When we take the first kind of attribute, the first EDA, and then we find them, first it was based on what data we have, right? And then what their coverage was, or other stuff, and then the data. And I feel like a lot of them, when we start to consider our list, are going to coincide with a bunch of this, but it's also worthwhile looking at this is what the ISMM has done to make sure, like, okay, we capture it because, like, keystone, but kind of more like a key indicator or not. Looking at that, comparing as well. I feel like within what we have in the EDA, already we have a bunch of, we have some that will already be
I like the idea of maybe trying the blind method where you have a scale and try to get people to assign the 1 through 6 or 1 through 3 or whatever to that scale without knowing what embayments they're talking about. Because we're all going to have a preconceived notion of something. You can try to see if it works.
How do you decide if it's working?
What's that?
How do you decide if it's working?
Well, yeah.
That's your preconceived notion.
Right, yeah. Probably.
That's very important, and I think that's like the bigger challenge. Baseline, where do you go? How do you know that kind of pushing it?
So is there any attempt to weight any of these characteristics in the metric, multi-metric type approach? Where they all basically, each of these attributes becomes value is in any of the other ones. I think it's sort of follow up.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I think she even said, like, some of the things, they're going to be weighted inherently, like grouper. Why did they choose grouper out of all the fish species? So if there's a grouper in your picture, it's the highest level of, whatever, more natural.
Right, yeah. So that's a good point, is that, yeah, so let's go to that.
Probably, then you put a number on it, it's just like,
it's really small. But yeah, so,
Emily, could you repeat the question for me?
oh yeah, the question was, could there be or would there be different weighting for the attributes to determine condition levels? And Todd brought up the example here of coral reefs, where for the fish community, if there's a grouper in an image, it like automatically gets very good or excellent because grouper is super important or a good, really good indicator of a healthy reef. So there's a, that's a precedent or an example there of like, yeah, you could decide that there are some indicators that are just far more important or supersede anything else. And I guess I would be interested to look into the coral reef documentation a bit more and understand, they've got a lot of attributes that they're looking at for each condition level, and how do they weight any of those, or, if you've got all positive or excellent level for 9 out of these 10 and your 10th one doesn't look so great, how do you assign a condition level in that case, So, I'm not sure what the answer is to that, but I just wanted to, hear their decision-making process. So, I like what Puerto Rico did, and they really focused on coral reefs. So we've done it. I work with the program that was developed in 1998 for salt marshes with EPA and coastal zone management, and they do this. That's all in there. And so that's really sort of manageable. So you can look at the attributes. You can, you can have your condition levels. So you could do it with eelgrass. You could do it with salt marshes. You could do it with water quality. But then you need to bring it all back together somehow to get your estuary condition, right?
Right.
But so are we going to be doing something like coral reefs, salt marshes, eelgrass, water quality, a chart, something like this for each one of the conditions, I guess, what do you call them, coral reefs? The indicator? So are we going to pick like 5 indicators, 6 indicators, develop something like this for each one, then pull it all back together and say, okay, now this is what your estuary looks like?
Well, I think that's a kind of point for discussion. However, I mean, we're sort of already kind of putting out the attributes that we have data for, kind of pass along the certain criteria, right? And I feel almost like, for example, it's more akin to Narragansett Bay or Tampa Bay. But they're here, like you said in the beginning, they're dealing with habitat, and they could certainly look at it as a thing from the habitat by habitat, but I feel like more, once we have the embayment categories, we'll be looking at the embayment level or those different types, the type of embayment, so do they have, or conditions or attributes that rise up to the top, and then get like BCG kind of for the particular.
Seems like maybe a different BCG for each cluster.
Right, that's right.
That's what I mean,
Right.
But it does not preclude that if we have a particular habitat, that we think really important with the doing the assessment first time.
I think one of the things that was very helpful to making Tampa Bay successful was that they picked a period when they felt like they could make a definition. This is what we want to restore to, because that's always, and they could describe functionally what Tampa Bay did, back in 1950. I think their original cutoff was, before there was air conditioning. This is when it all went to hell in a handbasket. So, so they said when it was that this was the distribution of physical traits, all of that. And then they were able to sort of, it was a very powerful communication tool for the public. There's a lot of, behind the scenes, that's professional judgment, doing a lot of data mining and a lot of monitoring and sort of trying to figure out what it all meant. But the message was so powerful to the public because they could relate to, they saw maps, they could see what it was now, they could say, this is how we want it to work. If we have this much seagrass, we're likely to see this kind of return on fish, we're likely to see this kind of return on water quality and hence the ability to use the water recreationally. So it was extremely important in certainly in helping get the nutrient reductions that happened in Tampa Bay going, because that's what helped.
That's one bay.
Yeah, I don't think, I know, but Salem sounds, you could do it for your clusters. You could sort of describe those cluster types in a way that might make more sense.
Right. Kind of curiosity, how were the nutrient reductions achieved for Tampa Bay? Was it through change in permitting or legislative?
Yeah,
political, or was it?
Yeah. They ended up having a consortium of, there's a huge phosphate industry down there, and that was part of it. And so they worked with the permittees, the permitters, and the local government. So there was probably like 30 or 40 people on this work group that ended up developing the reduction. And the reductions that Tampa Bay came up with ultimately became the TMDL for Tampa Bay.
Was there also a wastewater treatment improvement in wastewater treatment in Tampa Bay? Because they used to discharge it by injection wells and other means, and I think they improved the treatment. Right? Yes.
We just got published in Estuaries and Coasts, and I'll send a PDF out, and it was multi-century record of anthropogenic impacts on urbanized mesotidal estuary film sound. And it's, that's really catchy, Barbara. Well, but it cores out of Great Haze, and they analyze the cores. And basically it says, well, we're going to have to wait 115 years to get 25 centimeters to cover up, the bottom, and that's when we can get back to actually pre-colonial times. And that is the target, not, and you could look at it, you could say, well, we can't go, it's really interesting because you can't find a time in the sound that you can say, well, we want to get back to here. Maybe for one species, but for a general condition, I don't think there is one time. Oh, it's kind of interesting, and Emily, you can jump in on this. The thing that has always appealed to me about this is that once you sort of have this picture about what you want it to be, whether you can get back there or not is not almost relevant, but it helps you set the goals about improving. And so maybe you don't have eelgrass anymore, maybe you have rufia, maybe you've got some species or some other habitat that serves the same functionality as what you had before that you will not ever be able to get back. In some instances, the eelgrass, there's so much scouring going on that even if the water clarity returns, you're not going to be able to keep them there. But you could have something else there that serves as a nursery that, does the same thing that eelgrass did. And certainly when you think about the impacts of climate change on your system as a whole, you've got to be anticipating all those things. I don't know, Kim, from a regulatory perspective, we're going to declare everybody impaired because the same species are no longer there. It's just going to make our lives so much more difficult. So we need to be thinking ahead about, well, what should be there now, given these circumstances.
where a couple folks in this realm are thinking about the ecosystem services approach for that reason. Even in Narragansett Bay, the idea that, like, well, eelgrass is already at the boundary of its thermal tolerance in southern New England, and so as temperatures increase, we're just not going to have eelgrass anymore. It could be, nothing else but climate change affects it. It's just gone. So are there other seagrasses that are coming in that can replace it, one, or are there other, what are the services that eelgrass provides that we really care about, and how can we make other changes to help preserve those services? Relatedly, as we were talking about Tampa Bay and their sort of trajectory, in that same presentation last week, I thought that slide where they presented, if we restore this much eelgrass, it'll fix X nitrogen over this amount of time, or, denitrify, not fix, denitrify this much nitrate and nitrogen that we won't need a new treatment facility. Yeah, and they're quantifying the services on that scale and communicating that out, and everybody loves to hear something like that. It's like, yeah, let's put our money into restoring eelgrass or this other habitat that can do the work for us. So anyway, this is another way to think about it.
So I'm just going to jump in here. I want to make sure that we have time enough for the updates, which is the next thing on the agenda. What we really want to come out of this meeting today is, do we think that this is an effective tool that MassBays should be pursuing for assessing and communicating the condition of MassBays? What do people think about that?
Looks like she's sitting already on step 5.
I know, I was going to say identifies. I realized identifies.
It seems like we've had pieces that salt marsh assessment, seagrass assessment. It seems good about this. Somehow pulls it all together into so we don't have anything like this now, even though we have other kinds of assessments.
I think it's interesting that it's flexible and that you can use the BCG indicators that you have data for in the event that you don't have all the indicators that you would like in an ideal universe. I think this is a good method.
I like about it is that it's not prescriptive in the sense like grab what you have here and use an indicator just like this. It takes what you have and helps you kind of fit together in a way that starts showing you what you're doing is like really good. I mean, it's not really good. If you're achieving what you set out to do.
I also like the point that Todd brought out, which I think was helped me to understand the answer to my question, which is the cluster analysis may show that different indicators are different from, or attributes, or the biological conditions are different from region to region, which is something that we've tried to encompass or allow for.
One thing I wonder about is our region is so diverse, even with that clustering, are we really been able to compare Home Island to Boston Harbor? Should they even be on the same map, or should they just be
I know.
in their own category?
You can say that they're on the same tier. So a 3 in MassBay in Boston Harbor is going to be the same as a 3 in Great Marsh. You're just going to have different sets of attributes or different thresholds for how you arrive at those. But when you look at your tiers, this is what drew us to it in the estuary program originally, was because now we can look across 28 and say, yeah, this one is at a 3. We can talk about that even though Puget Sound is completely different from Mobile Bay, but they're at 3. Everybody's going to be at a 3, I think. Nobody's going to be at a 1. But yeah,
Everyone's going to be at 11.
No embayments left behind.
I just have a question. So here's the question. You're familiar with kind of what's already been done here with the EPA and the Northeastern Office. What is it that has already been done? Or I guess I should say this. Can we say we already are using it or not? And if not, why not? That's the question.
I think, personally, I think that you could say that you are, and it's just like a shift or, you know, using more specific terminology or more consistent terminology, like attributes, conditions, and, you know, you guys haven't done the assignment of levels and targets and everything, but there are several steps in the 11 steps that I showed that I think that you guys are already doing. I think there are a lot of programs, like I said in the beginning, this is not like a unique, novel approach. It's just now formalized and, you know, better documented to be consistent. So I think it's probably along the lines of where you would go if I hadn't given this presentation today. You know, you would probably do it just in using different words or potentially different visualization and framework and stuff. So that's my feeling.
Yeah, I feel like with what our teacher is doing, so there's the selected number of attributes and we have these targets minus the process. But I feel like, to me, these are numbers, but actually how realistic are they? To me, it's like this is like this test that kind of puts them in a certain perspective. Can we realistically achieve that? Or maybe even not achieving, but improving, measure improvement or something. And I feel like this helps put those numbers into that sort of perspective of realism and realistically with all the resources we have, and just get to that. It's hard to kind of explain it. I mean, it's more like
you described at one point that you can go from this framework concepts, if you want to, you can quantify them. In a way, what Northeastern is doing is already highly quantitative. And maybe what we need to do is back up and use some of these ideas in order to give Northeastern the guidance they need before they run the numbers.
right.
You know, because the meaning of those numbers is shaped by how we ask them to kind of set up their
right. And there are so many attributes whereas we might want to kind of, in our thinking, how do we manage our every step they kind of work? If we look at like additional heat graph or salt margin, etc. So condensing those numbers into those types of way we look at this I think would actually bring us to that. So when it comes to a management part, I mean, it's one thing to go out and measure a DO, for example, but we look at that. All right. So what is the result of that? We are improving water clarity. Heat graph, for example, improving, or is that a way of measuring it? I feel like this kind of has focus that those kind of scientific numbers into more management approach.
I also feel like to the extent that we are already on this path, we have the advantage of having access to Emily to help us move through it. EPA has already set aside some funds to pay for her time to help us with this, so that's kind of a bonus. So that's part of my calculation as the person who has to get the money to get things done. So part of what we wanted to do here was just make sure, but to make sure that this is in line with what we were thinking, and that it will get us to where we wanted to go further down the road with being able to talk about improvements over time, trends, conditions, in individual regions, and the state of the
Yeah, I think it can be challenging to think about setting these targets with climate change.
Yeah.
Because it's a moving target, so, but there are structures we can look at.
So, you know, Puerto Rico's moved ahead in one direction, Narragansett's moving ahead in another, and it feels like we could use both of those. Would you incorporate, are you thinking of incorporating some of the things that they've done in with the MassBays? Or
Like the lessons learned, you mean?
the lessons learned, but even, you know, coming up with something that's equivalent in our estuary unit that's equivalent to coral reefs, and coming up with an attribute description. Or
taking Narragansett where they've had the climate and they've incorporated that. So they're at this higher level, but instead of us trying to start from scratch on that, you know, incorporating that maybe shifting a few things, but beginning with those and then seeing, because we're going to expand it or change it for MassBays, but it seems like there's some good things in both of them that could be incorporated, so we wouldn't be starting from scratch with the 11.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty much if we that this is a good tool for us to proceed. I think that's the next step. We sit down and look at exactly where we are, what we have, the teaching plan, and then are there any stuff, is there anything that we can pull out from here, from these examples, or something new or from that we can put together? But I agree with you. I think use of words that's already that kind of thing. That's already working. Especially where there's some similarity.
So one concern I would have is that Northeast is kind of in process, and you know, they're going to come and they're going to give us this great result, really quantitative and very specific. And it would be, you know, disturbing if that was all done before we had a chance to kind of take these ideas of the BCG and kind of help, you know, pass that along to them and guide them as to how they set up their guidance and what number are they going to come out with. So that's what I would think maybe would be a good thing to do like next.
Before they're finalized, yeah.
So the question is, where is Northeastern? What are they doing?
Yeah, I have an update on that as part of the update, but we'll talk about it now. So we're done with geosynthesis. We have all the maps. Sam and I did a substantial revision of the report to address. So geosynthesis has a lot of comments and feedback, etc. that we have. Sam and I kind of went into that people, like for example, with removing reference to resources and stressors at this point and just keeping them attributes for the sake of like starting things like that. And so I'm anticipating sharing that final thing to you all by next week at the latest. I'm just like doing the editing right now. Now all those maps are at Northeastern, and we had to, because of timing and the rest students moved on, etc. So we have to revise a little bit the timeline, and Northeastern is now starting to pull out the EDA 1 maps and putting in the new EDA 2.0 maps. So we do the analysis, seeing that some boundaries have changed, so some area sizes have changed, etc., etc. So they're going to come up with a new set of categories and potentially where there's changes in those new targets. The timeline has shifted so that if we expect to final report by end of January, draft report maybe a couple of weeks before that. So technically, we do have time to kind of bring into the conversation, and that's actually John Gabos was supposed to be here today, but he couldn't make it. But they are aware that we're going to be looking into this, and I want to have this conversation with them so that if there's any point where they need to incorporate this piece or keep this in mind as they move along with their work, that is done. The other thing is that I don't see a huge issue in them coming up with essentially with the target, and as much as they are numbers, that they're looking at the data and so, okay, so what are the data showing us in terms of like minima and maximum kind of thing. And so that in itself we probably will need just to be able to pull out which are those indicators that we can use for conditions. I don't know, maybe I'm thinking of it too simplistically, but I feel like we do need that piece actually. And I don't think this is going to negate the other. However, I do appreciate that we don't want to kind of like do something and they say, oh, this didn't really work or this and this, and so we want to definitely avoid that.
Can we get a list of all the?
Yes, I have it here actually. Can I switch to this? Yeah, actually.
Yeah, if they give us the attribute and then for each embayment the value, I mean it's pretty easy. I can understand it out like now. Do it. And then, so if we come up with something like, okay, we didn't want to use all 20 attributes, because I was just thinking there may be some attributes that are better for delineating the groups, and then the other attributes get used in the BCG format within each group.
Exactly, that's what.
Rate within a group. So it could be just the physical characteristics of maybe like size, maybe, but like population density and impervious surface. Those things will delineate the groups into, get the Bostons and the Salem Sounds away from somebody else. And then within each of those groups, you could then do BCG on yield graphs or whatever the things are that are important to that group.
Right, and that's why I'm saying that we need this kind of this background work to help us. So these are the
I'm agreeing with you on that point, but I don't think it's awful that Northeastern's going up. I think we could do it potentially now if we come up with a different budget.
If there's a way you could like check in with them at an intermediate step, like at the point where they're doing that clustering, like to your point, Todd, like what if they come up with like 8 clusters and you guys don't really want to make 8 different BCGs and there's a way to refine the clustering so there's a fewer number.
That's what happened the first time. That's right. One cluster was 2 things. Right?
Yeah, there was one cluster with one cluster.
Or 2 clusters were just one.
No, I definitely agree with you. We need to with that at this point. They're just kind of going.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons we're recording
Yeah, because we want to.
presentation too, is that people who couldn't be here in this particular time need to know what's going on. Can do it. So John is one of them.
Yeah, and especially because because he's been the one working on that.
Hi, John. You're gonna say hi, John.
Right. So these are the attributes from the EDA 2.0. So you can see why it's not one. There are some that even as Northeastern is running through this, some of them have not been included in their analysis, simply because either the data, where it's like kind of amenable to that process, so the designated stratospheric inheritance is one of them. So this is like the whole geosynthesis, but there's a few that won't be done.
Yeah, but
So you guys, okay.
I was going to say half of those aren't really conditioned. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So we need to go through that. Yeah, right now it's like a little bit of, we had classified them as resources and stressors, and I completely agree with them that we needed to do that way. Just to look at them with fresh eyes and say.
And it's not even estuary anymore. They're estuary.
Yeah. There is a one.
They're not estuary. We're not only looking at estuaries anymore. So you have to take out the estuary.
Oh, right. Yeah,
but more coastal, or what are you using?
Yeah, because we have public
I think we're just calling them assessment units.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because we have the beaches and the, no, and I see it, there are public beaches and there's,
and that's the kind of editing that we were doing, like, with the final version, to make sure it didn't have the remnants of EDA.
So one of the other things is this weighting idea that we talked about, which is that the weighting decisions can, shape the output of the Northeastern calculations in very dramatic ways. So, I mean, if anything, it feels like that's something that you might want to give them guidance on before they run the numbers. You might say, this really matters, this particular attribute we feel is very important, this one maybe not so much.
So is that some way that STAC should be weighing in then? I'm sorry, you guys, but, Dan just pointed out that there may be some of these that we want them to pay more attention to as they're doing and clustering.
Yeah.
Is that something that, we can
yes,
get an interim report from John on how they're.
Yeah.
They had, Todd, were you here? You did something similar to the Subcommittee.
Yeah. Yes, so there, initially when we started talking with Northeastern about how to start looking at categories, there were like 6 things that we were going to have in serious service, for example, population density, homogeneous distribution, anyway, but then they ended up like looking at all of them. But I'm sure it definitely makes sense to kind of figure out which are the ones that like kind of rise up to the top kind of those key indicators of soil conditions and have more robust data. Data that are collected more consistently. Yeah, so maybe next conversation we can have like touch base with John.
I see a role in the STAC here. Looking at these things, we'll take like tidal flats or seagrass, for example. John's work will show the range of percentages for all the invasive areas, and then we'll have to decide where are the cutoffs within that range that are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Right.
It may be different for different regions.
The other thing to consider, like for example, something like fish runs, there are streams that just have never really been anadromous fish runs, and then there are streams that had massive anadromous fish runs and now don't, and then there's ones that are sort of still doing okay. So I think making sure that, I mean, obviously, as you showed, the historical comparison is an important part of it. But as we're deciding our priorities, being able to bring some of that knowledge to bear on sort of that more pristine condition for each of these attributes, I think would be very important.
Right.
I have a question about, about the estuary attributes, or the attributes. Yeah, sorry, the coastal attributes, whatever we're calling them. Are these, is this a sufficient list? Like, I'm wondering about.
Last year's question.
Yeah, I know. I should have caught it last year. So what about essential fish habitat or fishing activity? I see mooring fields there, dredge projects, which affect those kinds of habitats, especially on the Cape. What about the actual habitat itself? Yeah, I know, but it's essential fish habitat is just so important. Catherine.
Well,
it's not different.
legally, that's not a very good, I mean, you want it to go down.
The blocks I know is using are so large that
Okay.
it's not useful across the board.
Is there another indicator of the quality and type of fish habitat that is useful? Well,
Sure.
Oh, well, do we know what kinds of nursery areas? I mean, presumably it's the salt marshes and the seagrass that serve that purpose. So to the extent that you can start making that connection, that what do we care about? We care about nursery area, we care about refugia, we care about foraging maybe. Those might help us look at those specific kinds of habitats, but with that functionality in mind for the fisheries.
And I think that we start looking at these, what we have now, and start looking at those kinds of condition, function, etc., we see where these fall, and then maybe we start identifying, okay, what else do we have that we know about? Maybe how do we get into like certain fisheries or nurseries or I don't know, even like species and or benthics or conditions, etc.
So the one thing that we've got tidal flats, we don't have rocky intertidal, and that's where the lobster juvenile.
It is, we do have it now, but
Not there.
because it's
It's one of the assessment units as opposed to an attribute.
It's an area.
because so we have some different required properties that need to be information. I don't know why I left that.
I think we're getting a little off
Yeah.
the agenda. I don't want to cut off good conversations, but we do have a couple more things. The meeting is supposed to end now. Are people okay with staying another 15 minutes so we can do some of the quick updates? I'm sorry to ask you that.
Yeah.
Only.
But I'm going to, what's that?
15 only.
Okay.
For me.
All right. No more questions, folks.
So President has a few updates on other projects. MassBays engagement that the STAC can weigh in on. For the BCG question, I think we're probably the consensus that we'll go forward with it. We're part of the way there, and people think it's a useful framework. So if you have any other thoughts on that, email us.
Yeah. So right now we ignore the title. I'm just because we're gonna have kind of a couple of other things, but we'll keep them for next meeting. So I just wanted to very, very quickly run through an update of where we are on certain things, because a lot of times kind of we run out of time and I never managed to get to it. So one important thing is that we had said when we were setting the STAC again, reinvigorating it and putting together SOPs, was that we would like that to work.
Cressida, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Could you go closer to a speaker? I can barely hear you.
Okay. That's okay. I'm not very loud. It sounds loud to me, but it does. I feel like I need to shout. Thank you. So we want to make sure that STAC's work lines up with what's in the work plan kind of thing. We're not going to have a work plan for STAC, right? But there are certain tasks under the work plan that we kind of want to make sure that we have a role for STAC, and either it's guidance, advice, etc., etc. And so I want today to just give a quick update of some things that are either new or ongoing, and then pick up this conversation later. But in terms of what we've been doing here at Central Office, the resource assessment and restoration tool, that's pretty much what I gave as an update about the EDA before. So we all know kind of where we are at this point. The next step would be after today to start looking a little bit more into how the BCG can apply, looking at what we have, and see what methodology or approach would work best for us. The monitoring framework is still ongoing. It's a little bit kind of off on hold while kind of we work through this EDA part right now, but it's now top of my list to do. Regarding the Healthy Estuary program, we anticipate that we will have a run again of the program this fall, and therefore we might at some point pull you in, not before they come out, because we want to make sure that you guys, if anybody is interested in putting in a proposal, you're not deterred by that. But definitely we feel like STAC has a role in that, and Sam and I have some ideas on that as well. So in terms of projects that's been ongoing, as you all know, we've been working with DMF to do some mapping and ground truthing of multi-EP data for egress. Salem Sound was finalized in the spring, and now a report is available. I will share that with you through email. Jill and Catherine did a phenomenal job of looking at all the beds and trying to figure out how things are changing over time, since looking at pictures or photos from 1995 or even earlier. So that's a really good resource to have. The other thing that's in the pipeline right now regarding egress mapping is that, if you guys remember, a couple of years ago we did egress mapping in Salisbury, Kingston, and Plymouth. And based on the changes that we're seeing, we kind of want to go down the next step and try to figure out what the issues are. Obviously, that's not easy, and one of the things that we need to do is have a little bit more periodic monitoring. So we came up with this proposal that EPA funding, and to come up with assessment methods that citizen scientists can apply, so that we will have hopefully more frequent kind of observations of how the egress maps egress beds are doing, besides what kind of we would do it from a scientific basis, from the scientific angle. So, and that will hopefully give us a better picture of kind of more short-term what is happening, and then trying to figure out what those causes are. And the other thing is, as you all know, we've been working on coastal acidification monitoring. I think most of you were at the management committee meeting. We had a presentation there by UMass Boston. And this is moving along, and we're planning to deploy the observing system in early September. So I will let you know more about that if anybody wants to come along and see that happening, that would be awesome. Although I'm sure there will be a lot of like, okay, hopefully this is works, and a lot of prayer. You never know. I mean, you can have the like best system in the world, and as soon as you try to run it, sometimes it gives you some issues. Okay, so I think that's the update right now. I'm trying to see if there was anything else in the pipeline. But the other thing that we're trying to do, and we'll talk more about this later, is that we want to try to make sure that we structure STAC meetings in a way that will incorporate both the opportunity for STAC members to provide input, etc., on things that are ongoing. So when we need your feedback on a document or a method, etc., and also to kind of get together and discuss maybe, okay, these are the gaps that we foresee. What should MassBays kind of like not focus on? I mean, but is this a good idea? And there are all these kind of opportunities to kind of have a bit of a back and forth on that. And so I think that's no, I'm trying to think there was something else. Yeah, as well as lightning fast story.
Do you have time, or we'll talk to you afterwards, a little bit more about the rapid assessment for event monitoring, so where that you just got the funding, what has happened,
So Catherine, yeah, so we got the funding and we're starting to monitor now. Catherine, can you provide a bit, do you have kind of the latest updates on terms of the mapping itself that they were doing down in?
Yeah, we did our first couple of days down there in July, and we're going to fill in some spots between now and we're hoping to do it before September 1. So we'll probably be doing 2 more days in the field over the next couple of weeks.
Okay, but I heard that you were developing a rapid assessment that volunteers could do?
Yes. So we're working with, and if you want to jump in there.
Yeah. So one of my tasks for this upcoming year is to pull together a group of experts, some of you in the room, I'm sure, to help develop this protocol, and then try to figure out the best way to implement it. So it was something that we had come up with after meeting with Cressida and myself and CMF. As Cressida said, the client of these beds would benefit from some more frequent monitoring. Right. And in places like Duck Creek, Kingston, and Plymouth, and also places like Salem Sound, there is a citizen base that we haven't actually really tapped into too much, which is some of the voters. Yeah. And many of the protocols are, and many of the protocols are sort of boat deployed, or in some cases shallow types of things. But we're not ruling anything out. There's a couple of sort of existing protocols for plenty of existing protocols for seagrass monitoring. So pulling some of those in and seeing if we can develop something that would be manageable.
Yeah, but is this more like getting the edge, or
it's of the entire bed and health of beds, so specific, monitoring locations. Right. Essentially, there's kind of a balance between the seagrass net protocols and some of the work that Hillary Nichols has done, developing sort of this like honeycomb pattern, to your points, and doing certain mapping within those points, and the frequency, intensity of the monitoring. Yeah.
So I would just like to put in that I think that it's a large area, and often smaller patches are not picked up.
Right.
So the boaters and scuba divers and snorkelers can identify areas, maybe not go to the sense of this is a healthy one or not healthy, but they can say there is eelgrass in this area. Mm-hmm. And I think that would be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Barbara, I think you should be on the expert working group.
Yeah, and especially now because
I think you've just volunteered yourself.
And especially now because the reporting and sound showed like really, really good, some really good results in terms of like the health of the egresses, and also a couple that hadn't been like.
Right, they hadn't been detected, right,
yes,
so
and
they're, it's a large area and they're,
but even the transplant size,
because they're smaller or they're disconnected from the main bed.
Yeah.
So maybe Barbara can bring some of her good eelgrass karma. Yeah, so definitely,
I mean,
we're early. Sorry, Catherine. Go ahead, Catherine.
From my perspective, Barbara, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's, we can go out there and we can do our acoustic or video mapping, however we're doing it, but we're not going to be able to hit a lot of estuaries in any given year. And I kind of doubt that the state's ever going to fund like, annual statewide eelgrass mapping. So sort of my concept behind this is to get a system in place, harbor masters or shell fishermen or scuba divers, snorkelers, can report what they're seeing. And we can use some methodologies for people that are on the water more often that would maybe even give us repeatable data sets that we could use year to year to at least track presence and absence of the individual beds within an estuary. Because what we found is excited about estuary based on a report from a fisherman saying this, having a problem. So that's definitely what we want to encourage. And if we can figure out a method where we could do that year in and year out, that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm. So one thing just to throw into the mix, and I don't want to speak for them and commit them, but I had spoken with our dive team and, Bill Colarusso, Dr. Eelgrass, and I asked Bill whether he would be interested, because the Puerto Rico transects, video transects, we thought, is there a way that we can use videos as part of the whole monitoring protocols that we do? And if we could combine sort of their experience in doing these dives and doing these explorations of eelgrass, make it into a protocol that then can be used by other snorkelers and divers, that would be a great enhancement of your ability.
I think the EMF that you guys also videotape, right? Some of the egresses, Catherine.
Yeah. We tend to use plan view still photos because they're a little easier to quantify.
Okay.
But we do use video in a lot of cases also because the video gives us a better sense of sort of overall context of the bed and health of the bed and a little bit broader perspective. But for quantitative measures, we tend to use the plan view still. And I'm very glad to hear that you're volunteering still for our expert working group.
I don't know that Phil will be glad, but no, he said any excuse to get out there and do dives, so this is good.
Excellent.
So one last thing I forgot to mention when we're talking about the EDA update is that a bunch of you, thank you, provided comments and input, etc., on both the geosynthetic work and the northeastern work, and I forwarded that to them, and I'll be coming back with the responses. But one very important point was from them that we, at some point, need to take into consideration things like tidal flushing, etc., so the hydrology of those embayments. And I just want to make sure that you know then that we are looking into that, and I think at some point, maybe you, I, and Todd, and anybody who's interested, we can get a little bit into a deeper discussion into exactly what are the possibilities, at what scale do we need to do that, does it have to be very refined, what state, how, do we have enough data refined or good resolution bathymetry, etc., to be able to kind of get into those sort of the numbers that we would need. So, and we're also going to check a little bit with Northeastern first to see if that's something that they can incorporate even at least at a very coarse level at this point. So I just wanted to make sure that nothing, we're trying not to let anything fall through the cracks, especially if something important like that. So definitely, I mean, we're learning that, and I want to hear more about that.
All right, thank you, everybody, for coming, for traveling, and for staying a little extra. That's very helpful. It's been a very productive meeting.
Thank you for calling, Lynn.
Thank you.
Thanks for calling in.
Bye, everyone.
Hi,
Catherine.
Barbara, I'll buy the raffle tickets.
He's someone.